This episode is brought to you by Granola, Brevo, Shopify, Blinkist, Strawberry.me, and Fabric by Gerber Life. If you're in back-to-back meetings and want to stay focused while still getting clear notes, try Granola totally free for 3 months at granola.ai/Kwame. To level up your marketing, head to brevo.com/anything and use the code anything50 to save 50% off your first 3 months. Ready to launch your business? Sign up for your $1 per month trial at shopify.com/Kwame. If you want to stay sharp and get the core insights from thousands of nonfiction books in just 15 minutes, start your free trial at blinkist.com/Kwame. To take control of your career trajectory, go to strawberry.me/Kwame for 50% off your first coaching session. It's like therapy for your career. And finally, if you're a parent protecting your family's financial future, apply in minutes at meetfabric.com/Kwame. Policies issued by Western Southern Life Assurance Company, not available in certain states, prices subject to underwriting and health questions. Today's show is sponsored by Strawberry.me. Let me ask you something. Are you truly where you want to be in your career? Or are you waking up every day knowing that you're capable of more, but you're just not sure how to bridge that gap? Most successful people that I know, the ones that lead at the highest levels, don't figure it out in a vacuum. They have mentors and coaches guiding them. I've always said that the most important negotiation you'll ever have is the one you have with yourself. And for me, one of the toughest self-negotiations that I had to have was unlearning the belief that I could do it all by myself. Early on in my journey, I thought that I had to have all the answers, but I quickly realized that the fastest way to hit a ceiling is to work in isolation. It wasn't until I sought out mentors and professional coaching that I actually learned how to articulate my value and navigate the high-stakes pivots that got me where I am today. And that's why I'm such a believer in what Strawberry.me career coaching is doing. They're removing the guesswork and giving you a direct line to that same level of expertise. What I love about this service is that it gives you the clarity, strategy, and accountability that you need to turn your professional goals into reality. Whether you're trying to land a new job, advance in your current role, or transition into a completely new field, having expert guidance is a game changer. Instead of relying on guesswork or just waiting for the right time, professional coaching helps you to take control of your career trajectory. You'll identify the obstacles holding you back and develop a step-by-step plan that'll help you to move forward with total confidence. It's time to stop waiting. Go to strawberry.me/Kwame and get 50% off your first coaching session. That's strawberry.me/Kwame. It's like therapy, but for your career. Welcome to this masterclass edition of Negotiate Anything. With over 1,700 episodes featuring some of the world's brightest minds, we've carefully curated a couple of powerful conversations for you. What makes this so special is that you'll hear how different experts from different industries approach the same challenge in their own unique ways. Our goal is to give you multiple perspectives so you can build your own unique style. Success doesn't look the same for everyone, and in this masterclass, you'll see exactly why. Let's dive in. Chris, thanks for joining us today.
Well, thanks for having me. I really appreciate being here.
It's my pleasure, man. So how about you get us started by telling us a little bit about yourself or what you do?
Yes. Again, my name is Chris DeSantis, and what I do is I'm an organizational behavior consultant. And what that really means is I work inside typically professional services firms, because those are the people that find me, on anything related to how they work together. So performance issues. I address things like building relationships, mentoring, teaming, and dealing with generational differences, which we'll be talking about. So, or even pitching and presenting. So I look for issues that affect them, and I try to find solutions that are amenable to them.
This is really cool. Fascinating work. And you have a podcast.
Yes, I do. I have a podcast with my good friend, Mary Abijay, and she wrote the book Managing Up, and it's a podcast called Cubicle Confidential. And if you have a question of me as a consequence of my little time with on this today, feel free to write in and we'll answer those questions. We take those once a week.
That's awesome. So everybody, I'll put links to Chris's website, his LinkedIn, and of course, Cubicle Confidential as well in the description of this episode. And I'm pumped about this, Chris, because you've brought up a number of things that have come up a lot with the clients that we work with, and I've seen a lot on LinkedIn whispers about this too. And it's the intergenerational workplace.
Yes.
How do we manage that? How do we negotiate between generations? What are the different styles of each generation? Those type of things. But but also the new hybrid workplace and how
Yes.
the generational divides impact how we move forward with largely hybrid workplaces. So let's just start off with what you've experienced, because you've been, on the front lines of this. So when your clients come and talk to you about the intergenerational nature of work right now, what are some of the challenges that you've seen?
Well, if I can back this up a little bit, because one of the challenges of talking about intergenerational differences is you have to make the distinction between what is the perception of difference and what is the reality of difference. And so I think we often confuse the two, because the press I will say, amplifies that work of the worst traits of each generation. And so we think that must be true of them. And so, and what happens is, and this is sort of the salience effect, what happens is we see some of that, and then we presume it must be true of all of them. And so part of when I talk to people isn't just to make the assumption that I'm right about a generational difference. It is to elevate the notion that we have to determine what is true and what is manufactured in our differences. Even though I still believe there are differences between us, I do not think they are of the magnitude as presented often in the press. So I just want to because I like to defend the young, because I think the young get a lot of grief.
We appreciate that.
Exactly.
No, I mean, listeners, just a little aside. When you're asking people questions, sometimes it's not just the answers that they give, but it's also how they take the answer. Like, that shows a level of expertise that you need to recognize. Because Chris, this is great. This is great.
You.
Because what you've helped us to recognize is that a lot of times we're starting the conversation in the wrong place.
Yes.
Right. And so let's go deeper into this, because this is really interesting, because we're seeing almost how this machine is made, this bias making machine, and the different biases that are at play.
Yes.
Because as you're describing this, we have the bias where we're seeing this pattern recognition. The media wants to amplify the worst of these types of situations. So we see it. We're seeing that pattern recognition. This is kind of attributed or similar to like the availability heuristic. Now it's easier for me to identify and see that problem. So then it makes it more salient and easier for me to see in the real world. And then everything else kind of feeds into confirmation bias, where we say, this is the conclusion. And now I'm going to cherry pick the information to just continue to bolster that conclusion instead of seeing things objectively. So we need to really go very deep here and talk more about what is manufactured and what is real. And so where should we even start with that?
Well, let me start with the generational lens, because your point is very interesting. And well, first of all, everything you said is very interesting, and I can talk to that. But this notion of the assumptions that we have of others, and a further notion that we are objective in our views. We are not objective. We are subjective relative to how the experiences we had growing up shape our views. Now, to your point about a confirmation bias, we think we're right. So, and what do? We surround ourselves with other people who already agree with us. And this is called conversational coordination. Look, if you already agree with me, I don't have to explain the young, because you already think the young are problematic. So now I can get right into why they're problematic. What we should be doing is crossing over the difference and saying, look, there's a rational human being in front of me who is doing something that I wouldn't do in that circumstance. So maybe I should ask them why they're doing it that way, relative than accusing them of doing it the wrong way or making a judgment relative to that. So the point of this is that every view is subjective, and bias comes from generalizing. We are humans. Of course, we have to generalize. We have to get through the day. And so that I use the work of Noam Chomsky. I hope I'm not rattling on. Noam Chomsky has a sort of, I liked his process from generalization. He goes with deletions. Deletions are things we do when the more we're alike, the less I notice about you. So I delete all that. It's the exception that I remember. And I remember exceptions. I delete the familiar, remember the exceptions. And then when I remember it, it's a distortion of the memory. Because the things that are exceptional are not necessarily the normative things about us, but the exception to what is normal. Eventually, though, I accumulate enough of those exceptions, as it were, distortions, and they become the generalization that I have. And then what happens over time, and this is where bias comes in, think of it like sediment settling into the mind, and then it goes below the consciousness of the mind. And then when it reaches that level, it reaches the level of implicit bias. I don't even know I'm doing this. So this is a layered thing, and we do it in so many ways, but I think we do it particularly across age because it's a discernible difference in what we notice. I know that went on and on.
Wow. This was great. I mean, we have barely started and you see all these notes I've taken. This is incredible, Chris. This is great. And I think, where do we even start? Let's go back to conversational coordination. Yes. Because that is a really fascinating topic. So let me do a brief synopsis, and then I want to go a bit deeper into what you said about Noam Chomsky, because I think that you've really articulated well just how these things grow. It could be something small, and then it becomes something big that is a part of us that we don't even realize, but a major part of us that is steering the ship and having an impact that we don't even fully understand without self-reflection. So conversational coordination. So we talk to people who agree with us, and then we start off with those shared assumptions, and we just kind of reinforce what it is that we both agree is real without challenging it. Can you go a little bit deeper and tell us more about the ramifications of conversational coordination?
Well, the ramifications of conversational coordination are such that it anchors our assumptions. And when you anchor assumptions, you're less likely then now to question them, because you have to go against the normative group who agrees with you. So nobody likes to be the odd man out in their own tribe, as it were. So when you are surrounded by, let's take the example of this is a professional services firm, all of these are partners, and all of these partners agree that there is some problem with the young, and then you all of a sudden start to state, well, maybe it's us. Now, you stand out among them by virtue of that. But now the point would be, though, you could argue the difference here and say, yes, maybe you're right, but we don't tend to step out when we are already accepted. We balkanize our views. And so we stay within the bubble of our views, because again, when you step out of your view, you step into, I think, the potential of conflict, as you well know more than I do. And people are very conflict adverse. So it's better to just go along with what you already think and just find people who already think it. It's a shame.
Yeah, it is and it's a great example of the comfort zone too, on a number of different levels, because we don't want to. We're naturally going to avoid discomfort in most situations, and social discomfort and the fear of isolation. Like that's one of the most significant pains that we can experience, right?
Absolutely,
it makes a lot of sense, and so. What advice would you have for those people who are listening to the podcast? And then they could say, as a group, within my organization, I can see this conversational coordination happening. I can see the momentum of groupthink moving in one direction. I want to still feel close to my colleagues, but at the same time, I want to challenge them. So how can people challenge the status quo and that conversational coordination that's happening without standing out too much?
Well, this is an interesting point, because I think there's great complexity to this. And I just finished a couple of books I really enjoyed: Social and the Enigma of Reason and The Blank Slate. And really, these books all really lead down the path that we need each other. We are not who we are. We are who we are as a consequence of who we engage with. So it's not just us alone as an entity. We are genetically predisposed to be social. And so when we think about this as the confirmation bias, let's use that as a perfect example. Everyone walks in the room thinking they are right. I have no problem with that thought. But what we do is when we work with other people, they start to surface how we could be wrong, or how other views might be equally interesting, in which we take in. That's how we learn, and that's how we evolve. So I think arguing is healthy. That's the point. We should sort of understand that we have different perspectives. We should honor the perspectives, and then we should dig deeper into saying, why do you have that? And then we make our case. Each of us should be making our case. This goes back to the notion of diversity, and there's a lovely book on this, of the diversity bonus. And the idea here is the broader your perspective is relative to having people around you who are diverse, not just in identity diversion, but diversity, but also in all the things about us that make us diverse in terms of how we think, the less blind spots that we are possessed as a collective, and the better the ideas that come forth as a consequence of that. You see, it's just the admission that we need each other, and we should be gracious about the need.
Yeah. Wow. This is incredible. This is really incredible. And it makes so much sense, right? Because it's going to be tough for us to stand up and stand out and have these conversations. But like you said, it's a good thing. We need that type of friction. Think of it in terms of constructive conflict. It can be either constructive or destructive. And one of the things we always talk about is like, conflict is an opportunity. If you have the skills and you have the confidence, you can turn the situations of conflict into opportunities to learn, grow, and connect. But you have to have the mindset and the skill set to put it into action.
Yes, and I think you're the authority here, because negotiation is its own unique realm of expertise. And so when you're dealing in that realm of what you're doing, if you get the more positional you get, I think the more dug in you get into particular positions relative to the other. And my point about generational differences is that each of us brings something interesting to the table. But I think what we have to do is understand what they are bringing to the table that is distinctive from myself before we enter into some kind of an exchange, because we are in a situation of asymmetric power. The people in my age group, boomers, are probably in charge. And so with that, they are assuming that you are a younger version of themselves, when in fact, they're not recognizing that you are a unique entity unto yourself, you see? So they imagine they're doing this for you, and where the other party feels they're doing this to them. And so in that sense, we're not recognizing the difference. It's like, so what's interesting in the paradox of this is, if they are parents, they recognize the uniqueness of their child. But if they are working with them, they assume this is just a younger version of who I am. You follow? And so we have a disconnect. I'll tell you, poor young people come into the workplace thinking I'll be engaged in the way that the adults have always engaged in me. And then they come into this hierarchical environment where they are not engaged, but rather told what to do.
This is fascinating. This is fascinating, Chris, for a number of reasons. Because like you said, it speaks back to the mindset. Conflict is an opportunity. All right. We both have different things, different tools, different mindsets, different perspectives that we're bringing to the table. And this diversity of thought is beneficial to the organization as a whole. So instead of looking at this as a liability, we can look at this as an opportunity to learn from each other and share together. But it comes down to the mindset. And this is so fascinating. Because listeners, I don't want you to miss this, because what you said, and correct me if I'm wrong on this, Chris, you said that if there is somebody in the boomer age range who sees somebody who is, let's say, a millennial, let's say they're 30, right, and they can look at the person as a child. If it is their son, they could see the person has value. But then let's say there's that same person is within the workplace. There's no relation. They're just an employee. Now we see the generational divide as a problem. So it comes down to your perspective, right? So what kind of mindset shift could the leaders within a company have to start to look at the generational differences as an asset rather than a liability?
Yes. Well, the mindset isn't that difficult, because if you look at it this way, think of it as a parenting model. That in the world, I lived in a world of what's called permissive authoritarianism. That meant my parents were in charge and I had to do what they wanted me to do. There was no real dialogue. Now, if we jump to the millennial crowd, they are living in a world as what's called concerted cultivation. That means there's a concerted effort on the part of the parents to cultivate the uniqueness of our offspring, of our children. And this is more of a dialogue model. You see, mine was a world of tell-do, and they are living in a world of dialogues. My point would be very simply, if you just employ the dialogue model that you use in the home, in the office, you will have a better outcome because it's more comfortable for them to engage that way anyway. We confuse their assertion with us with insubordination or challenge. And that is not necessarily what they're doing. They're looking for explanation. Yet when we entered the workforce, we were part of the permissive authoritarianism from the parental model to the work model. So we never dialogued with our bosses. We just did what they were told us to do. So that's a congruent experience where the young are having a very incongruent experience.
As a self-employed business owner, my family depends on me. I think a lot about how I'm going to provide for them, how I'm going to build the business, and how I'm going to support Whitney and the boys. But I had a moment recently where I asked myself a harder question. If something unexpected happened to me, would my family be okay financially? And that's why I got serious about term life insurance and why I looked into Fabric by Gerber Life. Fabric by Gerber Life is term life insurance you can get done today, and it's made for busy parents, all online, on your schedule, right from your couch. You could be covered in under 10 minutes with no health exam required. If you have kids, and especially if you're young and healthy, now is the time to lock in low rates. And even if you already have life insurance through your employer, it might not be enough to fully protect your family, and it probably won't follow you if you leave your job. Fabric has flexible, high-quality policies that fit your family and your budget. We're talking $1 million in coverage for less than $1 a day. Join the thousands of parents who trust Fabric to help protect their families. Apply today in just minutes at meetfabric.com/Kwame. That's meetfabric.com/Kwame. MEET fabric.com/Kwame. Policies issued by Western Southern Life Assurance Company. Not available in certain states. Prices subject to underwriting and health questions. We talk a lot on this show about the importance of learning and staying sharp. But let's be honest, between work and life, who actually has time to read every single book that can help you to get ahead? And that is exactly why I use Blinkist. It's an app that takes the world's best nonfiction books and breaks them down into 15-minute summaries that you can read or listen to. They have over 9,000 titles, so whether you're into leadership, psychology, or negotiation, they've got you covered. Personally, I love to learn about a wide variety of topics, not just negotiation, but psychology, history, and communication. All of that knowledge works together to help me to be the negotiator that I am today. If you've been meaning to dive into the frameworks we discuss here every week, Blinkist is the fastest way to get those core insights while you're driving to work or at the gym. It turns your extra time into a real advantage, helping you to show up to every difficult conversation with more clarity and courage. If you want to start learning faster and showing up with more confidence, this is the tool for you. Go to Blinkist.com/Kwame to start your free trial. That's Blinkist.com/Kwame. Wow, this is fascinating because essentially, if you were raised in a household, again, generalizing here,
yes,
right?
So
of course. if you're raised in a household where you and people in your age range had concerted cultivation, you had that dialogue model. That's the relationship you had with your parents. Oftentimes, maybe the relationship you had with your professors if you were in school, something like
absolutely.
that. There was a little bit more back and forth. Then you get into the workplace, and then it feels a bit more like command control, where we are just saying, okay, hey, I want to have a conversation, and then it's shut down. Exactly. And so they feel belittled and unappreciated and controlled. They feel as though they're lacking autonomy and agency. Perfect. But then at the same time, the leaders are feeling a little bit negatively about the interaction. Like, why would you even want to go back and forth with me? This is disrespectful. It's insubordination. The way we used to do it, you just got in line. And so that it's that incongruence that's causing a lot of the conflict.
It's exactly right. I will make one caveat here about the young, because I do not want everyone to think that this entire generation is this way. There's a socioeconomic constraint to this. If you are in the middle classes and above, you experienced concerted cultivation, or You didn't if you are children possibly of immigrants who have a different, I will say, trajectory in terms of how they were raised. The second, if you were from the poorer end of the spectrum, you did not experience this. You experienced more of a deferential model. And so in that sense, which is very interesting because with how this plays out in the workplace is the young in the middle class and above are seen as more confident than the young in a lower socioeconomic class because they appear more deferential. And they confuse deference with somehow lack of confidence, which is not the case at all. And so that gets in the way. So I just want to bring that up because I don't want everyone to think this is a sweeping group in terms of all young people, but rather confined to the middle classes and above.
Oh, we're peeling back the onion here, Chris. This is great. And so let's take a step back and talk a bit more in general. So listeners, what I want you to realize is how important it is to get deeper knowledge on the differences between the generations in general, but also the differences within generations as well. Because the deeper your understanding, the more readily you will be able to identify these interesting cultural nuances. Because you're absolutely right. The socioeconomic status of the individual in question, whether they are born in America or a first generation American, like I am and a lot of my friends are, or an immigrant, that's going to have an impact. So you still might be within a specific age range, but those other cultural considerations are going to have an impact. And so, and I want you to get your thoughts on this, is because what we're doing is by learning more, we're putting ourselves in a position where we can come up with better hypotheses, better rebuttable assumptions about where people are, what they think, how they believe. But then we're flexible and nimble enough to recognize I'm coming into this with humility. I might not know. This is a hypothesis. I might be wrong and I might need to adjust.
That is so good. That's exactly right. In fact, one of the things I tell people every time I speak is when I'm done, I say the same thing. I say, look, the only truth here, the only truth is what is true about you and your experiences. That's our only known. Everything else here is conjecture. It's a theory. It's the possibility, but is not, you cannot surface that until you have a dialogue with the other. And so in a dialogue, always start out with yourself, because that gives us implicit reciprocity. That means that it's implied that they may share something, but never insist. People should, sort of share as they feel comfortable sharing who they are. So, and that's what I always suggest in this. I will say one other thing, just as an aside, because this fits what you do, is that I believe our young, in terms of these groups that I'm discussing, in terms of the middle class and above, they are probably our best negotiators. They will get, because they've been negotiating with you as parents since they were four. So
yes. Oh, that's so fascinating. Yeah. Okay, let's talk about another element of the workplace, the modern workplace, that really will have an impact on the different generations in a different way, is the hybrid workplace that's essentially coming out as the norm. What are some of the patterns that you're seeing?
Well, here's one of the things: the young feel vindicated, because one of the traits of what I have found, or what I have come to believe about the young, when I say the young's a very large statement, but one of the traits about them is they are time and place agnostic. What that simply means is their rhythm is not necessarily 8 to 5, or their rhythm might be, midnight to 8 in the morning, because they live in a 24-hour window, and they're thinking, well, it'll get done when it gets done, if it needs to be done. So they're not as confined to the construct. And so with the pandemic has vindicated in the sense that, look, people worked remotely and companies did not collapse. And so in that sense, we have launched ourselves 5 years into the future, and now there's an anchoring or an expectation by the young of greater flexibility. And yet the habits of people my age, to a great degree, want to return us to the older model, because the older model was successful as how we saw success happening. We are not wrong, and they are not wrong. But the point is, we have to find out what is the new middle ground relative to this, in terms of how will we create a feeling of belonging in a space that has more flexibility about it. That's where we're still experimenting. This is called mimic theory. We're humans look for other models of other people doing it, but there's no model here yet. In fact, the only models out there suffer from what's called the correspondence problem. We look at remote-only companies. Well, they were designed that way. They were designed that way. So to say, oh, we can be like them. Well, no, you can't. That's not, no, you can't. You are who you are. And how do we get past, this sea change among us? So that is experimentation is my advice to anyone.
This is great. Yeah, it makes a lot of sense. And it's very interesting too, because even when we think about individuals, we could replace individuals with generations and this type of thing, because we want to be right. And we'll always cherry pick the information that shows that we're right. So the younger generation is saying, hey, look, everybody went virtual. We didn't, the company's still here. Right. So clearly it works. And then the older generation is saying we have these institutional habits and, it got us to this point. We had a blip in the radar. However you want to describe it, a global pandemic is a hell of a blip.
Right. No, exactly.
But people are wanting to get back to the way that things were, because that wasn't fundamentally broken either. And so depending on what information that you want to use, you can come up with a coherent argument for it. Yes. And again, that's why we have to remember, we cannot just rely on data to win the day. At the end of the day, everybody has to come to the table and have these difficult conversations and to figure out what is right for us. Because like you said, Chris, every company has its own set of circumstances, its own culture, its own makeup, and everything like that, right? So we can be inspired by other people. We might be triggered by a little bit of mimetic desire, right? But at the end of the day, we have to experiment and figure out what works for us. And that's going to require taking the risk of trying something new, but at the same time, communicating throughout the process so we can figure out what the path forward should be.
Exactly right. And by the way, to your point, I could argue either sides of this and probably win the argument because I'm informed, but I would lose the battle. Because if one side wins over the other, you lose what we have the capability to do, and that is reinvent ourselves. That has mutual advantage to all concerned, you see? So to your point, we should just keep trying different things. And each time something fails, that's a data point of interest. What didn't work here? So don't do that. Just try something else, right?
Exactly.
Well, see, we blame the person for failing as opposed to the circumstance of the failure. And then we say it's an issue of their judgment. And look, judgment is often judged on the outcome and not the process of judging, which is another mistake. So what happens is these failed experiments get squashed further because people who do want to take a risk are further pushed away if they take a risk and it doesn't pan out. You follow?
Absolutely. Yeah. I mean, I think that's an example of the fundamental attribution error in action. Right. So if I make a judgment call and I'm wrong, it's because the circumstances led me to believe something that led me in the wrong direction. But if you make a judgment call and you're wrong, you're a bad person.
Exactly.
You're a boomer or a millennial. You don't understand anything. Right. Whatever the negative personal attribution is, we'll go for that, instead of giving them the benefit of the doubt and describing the legitimate circumstances that led them to that decision.
Exactly. Well, I'll give you a perfect example of a generational divide. So here's what the young get accused of. You've heard this. They're not very loyal. I love that phrase. I don't know. I don't agree with that at all, of course. But the perception of loyalty is defined by first of all, by the people in charge, and their idea of loyalty is, what will you do to sacrifice on my behalf? What sacrifices you make on my behalf, you see? And so, but they who have made it to the tops of organizations come from what I call the covenant. And the covenant was, if you work hard, you're pretty much guaranteed a job for life. That used to be the model. The model was put up with the grief. And so, for instance, I had a bad boss. I'm going to outweigh you. I'll get another bad boss. I'll outweigh them. I'll get another one. And finally, I get to be the bad boss. The point would be is I keep moving upwards through this process, right? Now, in the world today is this young person who might be attracted to the brand of the organization says, I'm having a really bad experience with this boss. That is the organization. And so I will leave. Now, if they treated me really well and I get engaged and they leveraging my skills and all the things that really bring the best out of me, I will stay with them. That's loyalty. So loyalty has moved from the macro of the organization to the micro of the experience. And yet we blame them for not being as loyal as we were. what we broke the promise. We broke the promise of the covenant. So this is just a transaction. And as long as the transaction is viable, I will continue on with it.
Wow. Oh my gosh. This is great, Chris. And this is one of those episodes where I'm like, yeah, I'm going to need to bring you back on because there's so many more things that I want to explore here. And you've given us a lot to consider. Let me ask you this final question.
Sure.
Let's say if there's an organization who's listening to this and they're saying, okay, Chris, I'm realizing there's some unresolved issues that we need to address. How would you say that they should start having these conversations?
Well, it's a good question because this is a change issue. And my theory on this would be get together a diverse group of the people that other people listen to. And not a large group, just a few of the most influential people at the firm, not the people with the highest positions, but rather across the layers, who other people believe. And then pose the question about what do you want to change or make the organization better. They then take in all that information because they are people other people will talk to. They then, I will say, filter that information, and then they bring the message back to senior management because this is your trust link. These people you can trust, and they are trusted, and they are taking this in, and they're screening out what I will call the peripheral noise and getting into the meat of what we actually can do here. And then you have some viable suggestions. So now everyone feels they can trust the process.
I love that. Chris, this is great. I appreciate this. And before you go, let the listeners know about you, your company, your podcast, and how they can get in touch.
Yes. Again, my podcast is called, our podcast is called Cubicle Confidential with Mary Abijay. My website is cpdesantis.com. And the book that I've written is called Why I Find You Irritating, Navigating Generational Friction at Work. And you can get that on Amazon or Barnes & Noble or Books A Million. So I thank you for allowing me to share that, by the way.
Yes. No, my pleasure. Chris, this was great. Thanks again for joining us.
You're welcome. Thank you. And thank you all for listening.
You've just heard one powerful perspective, and now we're moving on to the next. A fresh voice with a new angle on the same challenge, so you can keep expanding your skills. Let's dive in. Quincy, thanks for joining us today.
Thank you for having me.
Now it's my pleasure, my friend. So how about you get us started by telling us a little bit about yourself and what you do?
Awesome. Thank you very much. Well, my name is Quincy Penn. My pronouns are he, him, his, and I am a diversity, equity, and inclusion specialist. And so with that, I work with various companies on helping them with their diversity, equity, inclusion initiatives and programs, assessments and tools of that nature to really help with the efficiency of their work environment.
Well, I would assume you're pretty busy then, because that's a very, very, very important work. And so before we get into this, I also want you to shout out your PhD, because that is a really important piece of work. And I think it'll give us good context for the upcoming conversation.
Awesome. Yeah. So I'm actually graduating this May with my PhD in leadership. Yes. Very excited. And so my dissertation is looking at how intrinsic and extrinsic motivational factors impacts the workforce job satisfaction, which ultimately leads to the desire to be retained or not. And so an aspect that I look at is diversity characteristics and how diversity characteristics can impact one's perception of those intrinsic and extrinsic motivational factors within the workplace that then outputs their job satisfaction. So specifically, how can we intentionally address folks' work motivation, which will then lead into their job satisfaction and then form their desire to be retained or to leave.
This is incredible. Yeah. And I mean, the timing of this is perfect for you, because with the Great Resignation, people are like, what do I do about this? Well, now we have the answer. We call Quincy Penn. Right. That is the answer. So everybody, links in the description below for this podcast. So let's jump into it. So in this episode, we're going to focus on the unique aspect of diversity, equity, and inclusion that addresses age. We're living in a time where there are more generations in the workplace than ever before. And I know a lot of our clients have been struggling with that transition. How do we manage these diverse perspectives as it relates to age? And this is really interesting. So, Quincy, how about you just start off by setting the stage when you think about what the situation is right now with the multi-generational workplace? How would you describe it? When I started this podcast and built the American Negotiation Institute, I quickly realized something. No one hands you a manual. You're the strategist, the marketer, the operations team, and the tech department all at the same time. Every day, there's a new decision, a new problem, and a new hat to wear. Starting something of your own can feel exciting and lonely. And looking back, having the right tools makes all the difference. For millions of businesses, that tool is Shopify. Shopify is the commerce platform behind millions of businesses all around the world and 10% of e-commerce in the United States, from brands just getting started to major household names. With hundreds of ready-to-use templates, Shopify helps you to build a beautiful online store that matches your brand. It's packed with AI tools that write product descriptions, page headlines, and even enhance your product photography, helping you to move faster and more efficiently. You can create email and social media campaigns to reach customers wherever they're scrolling, and you can manage everything in one place, from inventory to payments to analytics, without juggling multiple platforms. Start your business today with the industry's best business partner, Shopify, and start hearing. Sign up for your $1 per month trial at shopify.com/Kwame. Go to shopify.com/Kwame. That is shopify.com/Kwame. Are you ready to take your business's marketing to the next level? Meet Brevo, the all-in-one marketing and CRM platform built to help you connect with customers, boost engagement, and grow your business smarter. With Brevo, you can manage all of your customer interactions in one place, nurture leads with their built-in CRM, and reach your audience through email and SMS, and keep them coming back with powerful automations. But here's where it gets really exciting. Meet Aura, Brevo's AI assistant. Aura helps you craft smarter campaigns by suggesting personalized content, optimizing send times, and even analyzing performance data to help you improve your strategy in real time. It's like having a marketing expert on your team 24/7. And of course, Brevo offers advanced analytics, seamless integrations, and AI-driven personalization. Everything you need to craft multi-channel campaigns that hit the mark every single time. Get started for free today or use code ANYTHING50 to save 50% on starter and standard plans for the first 3 months of an annual subscription. So just head to www.brevo.com/anything and take your marketing further with Brevo and Aura.
So I really like to make it simple, and I have a formula that I feel like everybody can kind of agree with. A formula of that you have inputs and you have outputs. You have cause and you have effect. In the scientific world, we call it you have independent variables and you have dependent variables. And so it's looking at how we can manipulate the independent variable, the cause, to then get the dependent variable of desire, the output. And so right now, we're recognizing we're seeing retention, right, as far as the Great Resignation, and that's going to be the output. And we cannot really directly address the output, but we really have to be more focused on addressing the input, the independent variable, as far as figuring out what is the cause of this potential resignation, right? And so I have it breaking down is that your cause is going to come down to motivational factors that people experience within their job. So essentially how one perceives these intrinsic and extrinsic motivational factors within the workplace will then determine their output or determine their culture or determine their job satisfaction within the job. And then we have a thing called covariate variables in the scientific world. And so covariate variables speak to the things that impact the dependent variable. So things that impact the input. And so with the input or the independent variable being intrinsic and extrinsic motivational factors, a covariate variable is going to be diversity characteristics, because one's diversity characteristic can then impact the way that an employee perceives these motivational factors in the workplace that then impacts their outcome of their culture. So we have various diversity characteristics, and one thing that we're talking about today is generation, so age. So it's looking at how can someone's age impact the way that they perceive those motivationals in the workplace, and understanding those nuances. And where the awareness that I try to educate people and to understand is how each of these generations have perceptions and to educate leadership teams on those various perceptions of the motivational factors. So when we talk about a term like culture, right? It's so vague because everyone can have their own definition of what culture is. And so having this vague idea of what culture is then gives you a lot of vague independent variables. So you have a lot of vague inputs because of the output is so vague. And so for us to be able to define clearly and be intentional about how we want to address these inequities or these challenges, we have to be able to clearly define what we identify as culture. And then that will allow us to identify what we identify as the independent variables or the motivational factors within the workplace.
Oh, this is really, really, really interesting because I like this formula. And so let me take a step back and summarize really quickly, because the motivational factors are the cause that leads to the effect, which could be the resignations that we're seeing, the Great Resignation. But what was interesting is that you said that the motivational factors are going to be based in large part on one's perception. And one's perception is going to be based on large part on these diversity characteristics. And so in this case, we're focusing on age or generational differences, but your diversity characteristics, I'm assuming, you correct me if I'm wrong on this, Quincy, it seems like these diversity characteristics could be literally anything. And so anything that we use to self-identify will impact how we perceive these situations, which will impact our motivational factors, which will have a significant impact on whether or not we want to stay in our position.
100%. 100%. And so the key is then being able to break down these covariate variables or these diversity characteristics and being able to understand how these diversity characteristics impacts people differently. And as we can understand how everyone is being impacted differently, then we can be more aware of how we can address everybody's needs, right? And that's what equity is.
Yeah, this is great. And so essentially, when it comes to how we're defining equity here, it's first getting an understanding of what people need and why, and then then addressing each person's individual needs differently based on those things. This is great. And I think really what it comes down to, which is what it often comes down to with human connection and conversation and communication in general, it's empathy, trying to take some time to figure out how everybody sees, thinks, and feels about the situation. And if we layer our approach to empathizing with other people with this in mind, then we're not just going to look at people in a general sense. It actually helps us to see different, I guess, stratifications of humanity in different ways, right? Yes. So we can see things in a little bit deeper and in a bit more nuanced way. So it's not just, all right, I'm looking at Quincy. All right, this is how Quincy feels. But now I'm going to consider, all right, considering again, the multi-generational workplace, how does Quincy's age impact how he feels? Okay. And I'm going to consider that as I'm empathizing in order to make sure that I can treat him the way that he wants to be treated, which is really the foundation of respect.
100%. 100%. So then it goes down to the next step will be identifying or being able to define generations, right? How can we define and break up these age groups so that way we can better dive into the nuances of the differences within these age groups. And so the term generation is a term that, you have scientists on both sides of the coin who say it's something that's real and it's something that's a myth, right? You have some people who believe that generation, that there's a tie to being raised or being born within a certain time frame along with other people because of the culture of society during that point of time. That's, of course, is going to have an impact on your experiences and that experiences create your personality and it creates your perspective. And so that's the tie to how one side of the coin feels that generations are a real thing because the time period that you grow up in is going to generate or is going to evolve the type of person you are, the way you think and things of that nature. On the other side of the coin, you have people who feel like generation was just a term coined by marketing agencies. to then target certain groups. And this was their way of how to target certain groups. And that there's no real tie to a generation itself. And that believing that it comes from more of a human development standpoint, which states that we all are going to go through the same human development stages. And within those stages, we're going to have the same thoughts. So it doesn't matter between someone who's 20 or someone who's 60. Everybody's going to have the same thoughts when they're 20 years old. Everyone's going to have the same beliefs when they're 20 years old. And that's the human development belief of generations, is that no matter where you are and what stage in life you're in, you're going to have a specific personality traits that are going to be geared to that stage of development. And so that's the kind of the two coincides to generations.
Okay, so all right, Quincy, listen, I'm going to push you here. I'm going to push you to publicly pick a side.
Yes. So I'm going to be biased in that. And I believe that we do have generations. I believe in generational differences. I believe that a time period that we grow up in, the things that happen change and impact the way that people are. So right now, specifically, we have 4 different generations in our workforce. We have our baby boomers. We have our Generation X. We have our millennials, or Generation Y, what people might call it. We have our Generation Z. And the next is going to be Generation Alpha. But those aren't folks that we're really considering right now because they're not near our workforce, right? Generation Z is around, and that's another thing. The year cutoff of what generation is going to be subjective, right? Because usually these generations are going to be about a block of 15 to 20 years in a sense, but when exactly that block begins is going to be subjective based upon the researcher or so on. And so for me, I have Generation Z, that cutoff is like 1997 to 2015, right? And I classify millennials as 1980 to 1996. I classify Gen Z from 1960 to 1979. And I classify baby boomers from the 1946 to the 1959. So these are going to be my personal breakdowns of how I view and classify these generations, and knowing that right now we currently have 4 generations in our workforce, which is going to be those baby boomers, Gen X, millennials, and Gen Zs. So now we are going to view motivational variables differently, but we have still yet to define what those motivational factors are, right? And these motivational factors is what I identify as culture. Because again, talk about culture. I really think that culture is a feeling, right? Culture is how you feel about a situation. And so I have 11 characteristics that will be included into, or that will be recognized as the motivational factors. And I get these 11. I really have a theoretical framework of human behavior, because it sounds, for human behavior, these are going to be innate things that we have about ourselves that will work across industry. And so I use Heisenberg 2-factor theory of understanding that we have content and context variables that attribute to one's job satisfaction. And with these content and context variables, it also can be recognized as intrinsic and extrinsic variables that essentially contribute to one's job satisfaction. And so you have 5 intrinsic variables, and those 5 are going to be achievement, advancement, recognition, responsibility, professional growth. And then we have 6 extrinsic factors, which are going to be organizational policy, administration, salary, status, job security, and interpersonal relationships. So all 11 of these characteristics are then going to need to be defined, right? Because even with these 11 characteristics, they can have different perceptions. And again, we're talking about people's perception. This is how we measure progression. This is how we measure culture, is because we're measuring folks' perception on their culture that they're experiencing, right? And so with these 11 characteristics, we have to recognize that folks can have various perception of these 11 characteristics. So it's up to us, or it's up to the leaders to then define how, as an organization, do we want to define each of these 11 characteristics. So that way we can be knowledgeable of how we plan to impact these 11 characteristics. This is how we get intentional. And so with these 11 characteristics, how I first like to do is I'll first like to have a baseline assessment. How do people currently feel about these 11 characteristics? Right. And so with these 11 characteristics, I have a breakdown of 3 questions that will then be asking three questions that will be assessing different perspectives of each intrinsic and extrinsic variable. So if we have 11 intrinsic and extrinsic variables, and then we have 3 questions per intrinsic and extrinsic variable, then that means we have a total of 33 assessment questions. And that's going to be the 3 times 11. So we have 33 assessment questions. Go ahead.
This is so cool. This is so cool. So yes, I know my listeners probably know this, but I'm a lawyer by trade, but my background is in psychology. So this is endlessly fascinating. It makes a lot of sense, because what I'm realizing here is when it comes to, for instance, this assessment, we're focusing on these intrinsic and extrinsic variables as it relates to the different perspectives in the generation. And so what I'm realizing here, and Quincy, you tell me if I'm off on this, it's sounding like different people in different generations could look at the exact same thing and feel very, very differently about it. And so coming to an objective conclusion about these things is impossible, because it's going to be modified by our generational perspective, amongst other things.
Yes.
Wow. And taking this a step further, then when we think about this in the context of diversity, equity, and inclusion, making sure everybody feels included, we're recognizing that an organization, let's say that's been in existence for 50 to 100 years, the organizational culture needs to shift as the people within the culture change. So yes, we talk about race, gender, sexual orientation, those type of things. I think within the diversity, equity, and inclusion sphere, that's where a lot of the focus is given. But it's sounding like, based on what you have discovered in your research, that when we're considering culture, we also have to consider the fact that we have 4 generations in the workplace. And if we're not renegotiating culture on the topic of generational inclusion, we're going to be missing the boat.
Yes. And that's exactly what we see today as in a Great Recession, is that we're seeing a lot of people missing the boat. And how we get to this point is because our workforce is catered towards the dominant culture. Just like everything, right? A dominant culture is going to have the power to then put their ways, their thoughts, the way they want things on everyone else. And so when you have one way that you mark your dominance is by being the majority, right? So automatically you have these groups who become the majority who gain this dominance. So before, you had the baby boomers, who are recognized as one of the largest generations ever, right? So they created a workforce that essentially everybody had to then adapt to, because they were head honchos. They had the opportunity to set the standard. And then you had Gen X come in. And then with Gen X, because they weren't as big as a generation as baby boomers, they had to really adapt. And this is how we can really talk about the nuances of each generation, right? With baby boomers, this is traditionalist. They are accustomed to this was big time for military as well. So during this generation, they're accustomed to taking orders and not saying anything back, but taking orders and doing. They do what they're told. They get the time off with no pushback, right? Because that can be seen as a sign of disrespect or not respecting the leadership. Whereas then we get to a Gen X. Gen X is learned as the latchkey kids. And they started to have this, they created this culture they created as this culture of being able to do things on their own. and being able to do things differently than how other people have done it. The Gen X culture is one of the first generations to experience dual family incomes or having both of their parents work. And so that impacted the way that they see and view what they believe that they should be doing. Right. And then you have a millennial generation who is coming in and sees things a different way. And mind you, the millennial generation also just became the largest generation ever. And then guess what happened starting in 2018? They became the largest generation in the workforce, right? And so now we have also this Gen Z who is emerging, who's also taking from a lot of the millennial culture, because of course with the millennial culture, that's when social media was introduced. Now everything is social media, everything is virtual. So it's like you have to keep up with these times, right? Where you have Gen Z, they grew up in this. It's natural to them.
If you're leading a lot of meetings, or if you're in meetings back to back all day, you know how mentally demanding that can be. You're trying to stay present, you're contributing, you're thinking strategically, but part of your brain is also tracking action items, decisions, and follow-ups. That's why our team uses Granola. Granola is an AI-powered notepad built for the way real people actually meet. Here's how it works. You take rough notes like you normally would, and in the background, Granola securely transcribes the meeting, and when it ends, it turns everything into clean, structured notes that are actually useful. And what I appreciate the most is that it works through your device's audio. It integrates seamlessly into the video conferencing tools that you already use, and there's no complicated setup. It just fits into your workflow. Granola doesn't replace you in the meeting, it augments you. It lets you lean in, focus, and listen deeply while still walking away knowing exactly what was deciding, who owns what, and what comes next. Before Granola, our team would spend extra time cleaning up notes and double-checking details. Now, we leave meetings aligned and clear. It saved us time and helps us to operate at a much higher level. If meetings are eating up your day, Granola is a no-brainer. You can actually try it completely free for 3 months. Just head to granola.ai/Kwame. That's granola.ai/Kwame to get your time back. Get 3 months free at granola.ai/Kwame.
So if you're a company that doesn't have social media, then you're going to be obsolete to that audience, right? So it's understanding these nuances that we have within our workforce. And so the challenge that we have is the transition of power from going from the Gen X and baby boomers to now the millennial and Gen Zers. And the challenge that we have is that it is widely recognized that people are in their professional prime at the age of 40 to 45 is what's believed that people are in their professional prime. So you have a lot of these companies, guess who their target employees were. They were going to be people in their 40s and 55. So guess who that's going to exclude? That's going to exclude people who are younger than that. Well, that also means that we're going to be excluding the largest number of people that we have in our workforce. So one thing I recognize in my research, and this is the funny part, out of the 11 motivational factors, my research has shown that there is a significant difference between the perception of Gen X and millennial, specifically millennial professionals in all 11 motivational factors. All 11. Significant difference. Not a little difference, a significant difference. And another thing that was tied to that is there was no signs of significant differences between baby boomers and millennials and Gen Z. There were some significant differences between Gen X and some Gen Z in about 4 or 5 different variables. But it was striking that in all 11, it was only Gen X and millennial who was like oil and water in what they want and in their perceptions of these 11 intrinsic and extrinsic motivational factors. So it just makes sense if we have in the masses that companies and organizations are creating their work environments to attract these Gen X professionals, that may not be what's attractive to our millennial and Gen Z professionals. So therefore, we see high turnover because with those generations, they're not staying in a way that they don't want to. They don't have loyalty to people who they don't feel like are loyal to them. And so they're going to leave without hesitation, without thinking twice. It don't matter if they've been there for a week or 2 years. They're going to move on until they find something they like. And they will continue to move on until they find an environment that attracts them. And one thing that I find very interesting with this is that we can see this trend in a lot of industries that are big time money industries, where the way you engage with your staff is going to be imperative. One thing I really see it is in sports. You see now in sports, teams try to hire these younger coaches or these coaches who have better relationships with the youth or with younger athletes, because they recognize that, oh, well, you got to communicate to this younger generation, or you got to communicate to these new athletes differently than the way you used to do it the old school way, right? The reason why they're making this transition is because it's billions of dollars on the line to produce a good team. Right. And so what you can do is afford to get a coach who's like, well, I'm not going to teach it the way that they want it. I'm going to teach it the way that I grew up in being taught it. Right. You can't do that because it's billions of dollars on the line. And so you have to change your ways. That's going to be most conducive to your end goal, which is going to be retention, getting people to perform at the best of their ability. Right. And so we can see it in these other industries, even like the tech industry. Like, you can be, if you know your stuff, you can be 15 years old and dominate if you know your stuff. We see in gaming industry pick up, right? We're seeing 12-year-old millionaires because they're really good at gaming. Like, these are the things that are coming in our age, and that we are seeing that we're being slow to adapt to, because we want to feel like, well, you know. And I'm 100% about, you know, respecting our elders and respecting the things that come before us. But it's also about being able to identify and respect what's coming and trying to get ahead of that to ensure that, hey, even though we have a diverse population, what is our real target audience right now for employees? Who are we really trying to attract? Who's really leaving right now and that's impacting our organization? Who's going to be the future of our organization? So a lot of these things that I'm speaking to, we haven't even began to see the beginning. We're just scratching the surface of the problem. It's really going to be impacting us 10, 15 years from now, when all of Gen X is moving on. Who's those companies going to have for the concession? They didn't prepare no one down the line. They don't have no one who's been working for that company 10 plus years anymore.
Wow.
So you're going to have to get someone from the outside, right? These are the things that we're accustomed to, like your CEO, or you have higher up people in leadership who's going to have worked with the company for 15, 20 years. I go to companies and they have people who work with them for 40 plus years. You know, those aren't things you're going to see anymore. And now it's about how can you attract and keep these folks, even if it's for 5 years. 5 years may be seen as a plus. Like, if we could keep somebody for 5 years, that's a win. If we can switch them to 10 years, that's even amazing. So how can we start being more intentional of how we want to retain our employees, especially our best talent, especially our young best talent, that's going to help us with the longevity of our company and have continuity within the work that we're doing. So that way we feel comfortable, these organizations feel comfortable putting the leadership reins in the hands of these individuals who've been working with their company for several years, opposed to someone who's new or who's never been working with their company, who's an outsider. We're not really building up that continuity.
This is incredible. Okay. So Quincy, what piece of advice would you give companies who are now realizing this is a problem that is just getting started? They might have thought that we are at the like at the peak, but really we are at the valley. It seems like it's going to become more of an issue as time goes on. So what is one thing that companies can do to start to begin to transition in a way that creates a workplace that's more inviting, welcoming, and inclusive of people of all generations?
I would say you have to develop an appetite for feedback. Oftentimes that may be some leadership team's biggest hang up, is that they don't really want feedback because they feel like what they're doing is good enough, or because of what they've been doing what they've been doing for so long that No, I'm not going to change it up to try to market to a younger audience, because when someone hears a younger audience or they think of a millennial audience, they have this tag of this person is a young, this person is a child, this person doesn't have experience, this person is inexperienced, right? And we got to get rid of that tie, and that label, right? And that goes into having diversity, equity, inclusion, about eliminating labels. Don't look at someone. And the crazy part is we see our baby boomers who are experiencing the same thing, but just on the other end, because now instead of like millennials who may be perceived as inexperienced or too young, baby boomers are being seen as too old, or they don't have it no more, or we need to take it out of their hands because they just don't know the new ways, right? So we put all this attention to this dominant group, right, which right now happens to be the Gen X population, because they fit within that prime professional age range of 40 to 55. And so if we have an appetite for feedback, we can then be searching for ways to gain feedback from these different groups. So that way we can be knowledgeable of how they feel, and then be able to address those needs in those areas. And that's why it's so important for needs assessments. That's why it's so important for having assessments to create a baseline understanding of where you are as an organization. So now you can be intentional about what you do to impact it, opposed to just trying all these various things that you hear other people doing, putting in bonuses. Oh, you can do this type of work. You know what I mean? But they just try to do anything and everything in hopes that this is what's going to retain someone. But meanwhile, you're just wasting a lot of resources because you don't even know what you're trying to change. And then two, you don't know what you're doing is what they want. You know?
Wow.
A good example that I like to tell people that I found in my studies is one of the 11 motivational factors that a lot of companies can identify as potential barrier or a challenge for employees and their job satisfaction is going to be salary, right? Salary is going to be huge. And oftentimes people feel like, well, if I increase someone's salary, then they'll be happier, or people is unhappy because they don't have a high enough salary, right? And so what they try to do to combat that is, well, we are going to give them these bonuses, or we're going to give them these stay on bonuses, or these signing bonuses and things of that nature. And then we feel like if we give them this, then they're going to stay. And that's going to be our investment in return. But as I said, these characteristics, these motivational factors have to have multiple perspectives, right? And so I've broken down salary into 3 different perspectives. I've broken down salary into one perspective of, do you feel like you make enough? Do you feel like you make adequate money when you're comparing yourself to your colleagues or to someone else who does the same position as you, right? Do you think you're compensated fairly when compared to other people who do the same job? So that's one facet. Another facet I asked is, do you think you get paid fairly for the amount of work you produce, right? And that's going to be different because someone may say, well, I produce X, Y, and Z. I produce more than what my counterpart produces. So therefore, I believe I deserve more. Right. And then I asked them this third question. Do you feel like you make enough money to live the life that you deserve? To have the lifestyle you deserve. Right. And then within an assessment, I can assess the ratings of these 3 things so I can see them how they feel about the aspects of salary. In my research, I recognized that people rated high in agreements that they felt like they were equally compensated when compared to other peers. So that was rated high. So they didn't feel like they were paid differently or worse than the next person. Then when asked the question, do you feel like you get paid adequately for the work you produce? They scored a little bit lower on that one. Because some people feel like, well, I'll produce a lot of work, but no, I don't really feel I get paid to the level that I produce. Now, the lowest rating of all those was, do you get paid enough to live the lifestyle you deserve? And I specifically asked the question, deserve opposed to want, right? Because you can have people who want to be a millionaire, but it's like, do you deserve to be a millionaire for all the work that you do? You know what I mean? And then so I asked this question, deserve, because it's one thing to feel like I don't live the life I want. And it's another thing to feel like I don't live the life I deserve, because then you feel cheated out of.
Wow.
Right.
Wow. Oh, this is good.
Now, salary oftentimes is connected to work-life balance or someone's lifestyle, right? And oftentimes people feel like if I gain more money, if I get more money, if I have a higher salary, there's more pleasures I can now indulge in for my personal life. Rather, that is, I can now go on multiple vacations with my family. I can now purchase a home. I can do these extra things that this money is going to give me. But at the end of the day, it's really pointing at having or enhancing your lifestyle. So when you have companies who are thinking about, well, if we know people have a problem with their salary, then they think, well, can we afford to give someone a raise in salary that's actually going to be impactful to move the needle of them being retained, right? Because it's not like giving someone a 25-cent increase for an hourly worker or giving someone a $5,000 increase for a salary worker is going to move the needle as far as them being satisfied or unsatisfied with their salary, right? But yet you'll have companies like, all right, we're going to give $500 signing bonuses. But then you will count this up compared to all the different employees you have that you're going to be issuing out. That's going to be a lot of money compared to if we can find ways that we can enhance someone's life, that can also impact how they feel about their salary. So you see companies do these perks where they will like, we'll pay for your gym membership, or we'll pay for this type of membership, or we'll give you $100 wellness perk every single month, right? So now someone is getting this money or this perk that they can then use to enhance their life or their lifestyle, which can then add to them feeling better about their salary because we now take up for that. And so for companies who want to have a better scale, it's going to be a lot cheaper for you to give your employees or offer, not even give, to offer your employees $100 or $150 monthly perk to then take up to do your membership, opposed to trying to give that person a $3,000 or $5,000 or really a $15,000 to $20,000 raise to really help them push that needle forward. So save the money.
Wow. Okay, so let's back this up. So essentially, what you're saying is that a lot of times companies will realize that there is a problem, and they will say, okay, there's a problem in the output, the conclusion, and so they would say, all right, I will change this or that or this to solve for that problem. But if they don't do the research and they don't do the assessment and figure out what the problem really is, then they're going to be trying to solve for the wrong problem. And so they could spend way more money solving the wrong thing and then still have the same problems, but a lot less money. Unreal. Okay, this is mind blowing. This is crazy. This is crazy. And there we go. Our first episode on the multi-generational workplace, and my head exploded.
Right. Quick stat for you. I got a quick stat for you. Our country as a whole spends over $30 billion in rehiring annually. Our nation, our country spends over $30 billion annually in rehiring. Just imagine if companies would invest 10% of that into perk programs. You help with retention and you save money. If I don't know a company who will be down for that, then I don't know what they want to do there.
Wow. This is Quincy. My goodness, this is great. I really appreciate this. Before you go, let the listeners know about your company and how they can get in touch with you.
Definitely. So I have Quincy and Associates Global. People have questions, we have answers, and that is my workforce development agency where I provide leadership training, diversity, equity, and inclusion training, and assessment tools for companies and leadership teams to be able to assess and grow their awareness around diversity, equity, and inclusion and leadership, but really about getting the most out of their employees. And that's what Q&A is really about, getting the most out of employees. And so I would love to put I don't know if I could put my email and contact information in the chat or have that be attached, but I'd love to do so. You can reach me at Quincy, QUINCEY, Penn, PENN @gmail.com, or you can reach me at QANDA global @.com as well for emails as well.
Fantastic. So, everybody, we're going to put links in the description of the podcast episode for all of those. And Quincy, I really appreciate it, man. Thank you.
My pleasure. Thank you for having me on. It's been a pleasure.
That's the power of a masterclass. One topic, multiple lenses, and real-world application. You've just heard 3 experts tackle the same issue in different ways, and now the question is, what will you do with it? Negotiation isn't theory, it's practice, it's self-awareness, it's choosing courage over comfort. So pick one insight today and apply it in your next conversation, because skill doesn't come from listening, it comes from doing. I'll catch you in the next one. Hey, if you're still here, that means you really like this episode. So why don't you leave us a review? 5 stars, please. That really means the world to us, and it helps other people find the show. And now, I will catch you later.